Hello, this is That Atheist Show. I'm Preston, that atheist dude.
And I'm Connie, that atheist lady. Welcome to That Atheist Show.
We want to provide an atheistic perspective on current events with evidence-based discussion.
We believe the separation of church and state is vital for a functional society and always promote facts over feels.
So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and check out our website, thatatheistshow.com, for blog posts and more.
And don't forget to catch us here on Tuesday nights on YouTube and IPM Nation at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well,
and send us emails to suggestions at thatatheistshow.com.
Definitely, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have a pretty hot topic. It's been happening for, wow, I think almost 3 weeks now, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been longer than anybody expected it to go on.
Yeah, so what's going on in America right now is the Bundys have taken over the Bureau of Land Management over in Oregon. They've taken over a federal building as a militia, an armed militia, and basically they're making allegations towards the Bureau of Land Management as if they've stolen land from them and a tyrannical government has taken over and forced them off their land and all these things. Where it stems from is the Hammonds. We'll get into that a little bit later, but first we want to show you who the Bundys are. The Bundys that are on location are basically the same people from last year's Nevada event when they were also fighting for grazing rights on federal land. They held off it was the BLM feds, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the BLM feds. They were holding them off.
Same silly situation, just in a different location.
Yeah, basically it was happening in Nevada, and now it's happening in Oregon. So the Bundys felt like they needed to come in and intervene because they got away with it last year, so they'll help out the new guys. Well, let's show you guys who the Bundys are. We're going to do a little recap if you haven't heard about what's going on or what happened in Nevada a year ago.
For days, the land around the Bundy ranches seemed somewhat like a police state to people in this community.
Throwing women to the ground, tasing them, sicking canine dogs on them.
That's caught the attention of private militia across the country who feel First Amendment rights are being violated.
That's what we do. We provide armed response.
Jim Lordy came from Montana to join the protesters, and he says he's not afraid to shoot if necessary.
Why the gun? Well, they have guns. We need guns to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government.
And he says other militia members are joining him.
There's many more coming.
There you go, honey.
But for this small community, violence isn't a part of the conversation.
These people that are coming in could totally disrupt everything.
Restaurant owner Judy Metz says adding guns and militiamen could lead to lives lost.
That absolutely frightens me.
Somebody does something or says something and these guys pull a gun, that's going to be that's going to be it.
For now, things remain peaceful, but these protesters stand ready, expecting things could turn ugly at any moment.
So that happened last year in Nevada, from the ranchers versus the feds. I want to note that when looking into that case to find that video for you guys, I found another video that said the real story behind it, and it was talking about how they fought off the feds with their words and all these crazy things because it was their right. Well, the video was from InfoWars, and it was very heavily edited, so I really can't hold any credibility to that at all, because that's kind of what we talked about last week, how they're able to spin things in amazing ways to make conspiracy theorists flock to them and just say, oh no, the tyrannical government is against us, to where if there were a tyrannical government, I feel like they would have actually just murdered all of these people by now and kind of held them in like a public setting and been like, hey, don't be like these guys because we'll kill you, because that's what tyrants do.
Yeah, they don't stand there and go, hey guys,
you shouldn't do that.
You shouldn't be doing that right now. No, they would have just blown them up.
Yeah, that's kind of what tyrants really actually do, and I haven't seen any cases of ranchers getting bombed by...
People would be arrested, people would be killed, And what's really funny about that to me is that like they act like they want to like live in this Wild West wonderland, but back in the day, in that, era that they think they're still living in.
Manifest Destiny, you mean?
Yeah. But
Not
like
that far
back
back.
then, if they did something that was like have you seen about like whenever they decided to build the railroad and stuff, and like if somebody's house was in the way or somebody's land was in the way, the government just came in and took it, and if they didn't want to give it up, the government killed them. Like they would straight up go in and just be like, well,
or they'd just burn their house down and just be like, well, you should have sold it because we would have given you money.
Yeah, and they're like, too late now.
And this was.
Then you just don't have anything, and
that's not what's
really
happening.
Wasn't that long ago. But obviously that's not what's happening now. So they're like tyrannical government and blah blah blah, and it's like, no, like we're not a tyrannical government anymore. Like we don't do those
Well,
things.
we weren't even back then. That was more the privatization of the whole entire railroad stuff that was just destroying everything. Basically, it was the non-regulation that allowed that to happen almost. And even
because the government was telling those companies that, like, just get the people out of the way.
Yeah,
get
any way you can. They were like, just
any way
do
that you can. Like, just go at it. We just want to get the railroad built.
And I don't think that they foresaw all of that happening when they made those agreements.
Of course, that's what went down.
It's the tyrannical government. Of course it is. I mean, it's hilarious to see all these accusations and things like that just, to me, they don't have enough evidence for me to believe them. I mean, we went over it last week. We're skeptics. We look for evidence. If we don't have enough evidence to believe something, then we have no reason to believe you. And in this case, everything that's for the Bundys and the reason why they're taking over for the Hammonds is the only source of information are the Bundys themselves. Like, if I looked at a few articles that all source straight back to a Bundy Ranch blog. The Bundy Ranch blog. Yeah, and it says the real facts of the ordeal, and
it doesn't link out to like any public record court cases or anything like that to
it links to itself.
Verify what you're saying.
It literally links to itself at one point, and you're just like, why? It says more citations here, and when you click more citations, it links you to another page that has all the same information with a few side notes added to it. That's their source. It's themselves. So when they say things like the BLM came and they rerouted the water from the public territory through our land and away from how we were able to use it, and that caused the river to overflow and flood into our farms. This is a claim that's made on the page, and what they do with this claim is they say that it's the Silvies Plains. Silvies Plains that were overflowed when the river overflowed. So remember, it says Silvies Plains. Now I'm going to show you what I found when I looked up Silvies Plains. I found Silvies River Floodplain, meaning this area is known to be flooded. But in the article,
it's a
of course,
flood zone.
Yeah, there's no.
It's a known flood zone. Like nobody changed anything. It just fucking floods there because it's below sea level.
It's historically a shallow, slow-moving river system of sloughs and swales, interspersed with meadows. In wet years, the flooding banks of the Silvies River creates an extensive wetland system in the valley. This region is characterized by miles of privately owned grasslands and open pasture with some sagebrush uplands scattered throughout. Now, some of these privately owned grasslands just happen to be where the Hammonds are. And so that's just ridiculous for the claim to be even made, in my book at least. If anybody has any conflicting evidence with this to prove me wrong, please, post it in the comments or something like that. But to me, they're just not understanding the area they live in, I guess. Or they're hoping that others don't understand it to the point to support them blindly. Maybe.
Well, there was a drought for years, and during that drought, it never flooded.
Of course.
But now it's flooding.
So it's got to be the government. The government's fault. Big bad government. It's crazy. So now we want to go back to why is this land owned by the federal government? Because that's a big part of the discussion is why are these lands that were privately owned by ranchers, why was the government allowed to come and now own it? The government owns quite a bit of land in the western area of America, And some people see this as a growing tyranny. They're like, oh my goodness, they're getting so much land. They want to own everything, and then the private people aren't going to own anything. Well, when you look back at the history of America, we had this idea that when you go west, you can do whatever the hell you want, so long as you claim the land first, because that's how the government claimed the land of the West. They just went over there, laying pikes down. They're just like, this is my land. I'm going to use it for my animals and my family, and I'm going to pass it down to generations and generations. And that was the idea. Great. Mm-hmm. That's what happened so long ago. But now we're going to look into 1908. In the late 1880s, plume hunters decimated North American bird populations in pursuit of breeding feathers for the hat industry. Hunters targeted large flocks of colonial nesting birds and shorebirds, killing birds indiscriminately and orphaning chicks. Eventually, the large numbers of colonial nesting birds on Malheur Lake were discovered by plume hunters. In 1908, wildlife photographers William L. Finley and Herman T. Bowman discovered that most of the white herons, which are egrets, on Malheur Lake had been killed in 1898 by plume hunters. After 10 years, the white heron population still had not recovered. With backing from the Oregon Audubon Society, Finley and Bowman proposed establishment of a bird reservation to protect birds, using Malheur, Mud, and Harney lakes. This is the entire area that the Hammonds live in, and when the government performed this operation of making it into a reserve, they offered to purchase the land from the landowners. Many of them sold their land, so they got hundreds of thousands of acres. A few did not want to sell their land. And that's when they started accusing the flooding, and they were like, oh, well, we're just going to give up our land because it's already flooded, it's already destroyed. Which I just don't buy that. I just don't buy that. When you go into the Bundy Ranch blog, it says that, and you're just like, that's just a really weak claim to make. So now you have the Hammonds as the Lone Rangers, basically. The Lone Ranchers, the ones that, never gave up their land to the tyrannical government. And I even have some pictures that were taken by those two photographers. These pictures were used to convince Teddy Roosevelt to create what has become the Bureau of Land Management, the whole idea of national parks, federally reserved land, so that the habitats can flourish and repair themselves and things of the sort. So I'm going to show you those pictures here. Sorry for everybody on IPM Nation that can't see these. But I mean, it's basically that these people calling the government all tyrannical and things like that, they're thinking back to how the Constitution was before changes were made, because they think that it's infallible. They might think that it was, I don't know. I mean, we saw.
They're just thinking back to the time whenever the country was just, if you can keep people off it, then it's yours.
Right.
And that's not the way it is anymore. And especially because, now we value wildlife because we understand how important it is to the environment and the ecosystem, because, those birds were who knows what they're eating in the area or whatever. And then it's just whenever you lose one species, it can just cause
a chain
big,
reaction.
huge, like domino effect of stuff just going to crap. And
the entire environment.
So now it's like, okay, so these birds are important. We need to keep these birds here, and so we're gonna do this thing to make sure that these birds don't all die off.
Right.
And
the idea of reserves.
It's not a bad thing, but these people are just so self-centered that they don't care
sovereign
about anything
citizens.
else.
They are sovereign citizens. They think that the Constitution is protecting their private rights over the rights of others, including the wildlife.
Yeah, and that's not the way it works. It's like your rights end where something or someone else's rights begin.
Right,
So.
which brings us to how they were arrested in the first place. The reason the Hammonds were even arrested were because they started a fire in response to, I think it was a wildfire at the time. They started a fire to
protect their property.
Right, to protect the property. And
They were fighting fire with fire.
literally. According to the Bundy blog, they actually called the fire department. They said, hey, we're going to do prescribed fire, prescribed burn. We're going to fight off this wildfire. And the Fire department was like, cool. And their fire kind of got out of hand, and it went off to destroy some federal land. When it destroyed the federal
it burned
land,
127 acres, isn't that right? Wasn't
yeah,
that?
it's quite a bit. I think
Yeah.
it was around that number. We could check. You guys could check the sources
So it
below.
didn't just get like a little out of hand. It burned 127 acres of
Right.
land, and they're claiming, well, it stopped that wildfire.
Yeah, and it did. It did. And it did stop their house from burning, but they
also
understood.
burned 127 acres of land that wasn't theirs.
Now, this is the beautiful part of the entire situation currently happening, is that the Hammonds understood this. They they completely understood that they were at fault here.
Yeah,
They
they're like,
surrendered
sorry guys,
themselves.
we fucked up. Like,
Yeah,
they did it.
they
know.
admitted to it, and they even went to jail. They went to jail for, I think, a year or two. And the judge happened to be retiring that day. This is all on the Bundy blog. He happened to be retiring that day, and they brought in chocolate cake, and they put it on his desk, and he's like, hey, guys, you're going for just 2.5 years. Even though you're labeled as terrorists for arson, I'm going to give you 2.5 years. So they went to prison for 2.5 years. They got out, and some years went by. This guy's been retired since, and just recently a judge came out, and he was just like, wait a second, they only served what? The minimum is 5 years, so they have to serve the rest of their term. And the Hammonds were like, okay, let's do it.
Like, they understand that they got off because of preferential treatment from a judge that they probably had some kind of, personal relationship with. And they're like, okay, eventually, they probably fully understood that eventually it was going to catch up to them.
Who knows?
And
we don't even know. Nobody really knows
we
at this
don't
point.
know. I mean, but it's like, you only served this much of your sentence, and then it's like the minimum for terrorism by arson is
5 years. and
so they know that, and they're ready to go to jail. They don't even want the Bundys helping them.
that's the thing, yeah. They don't even when the Bundys showed up, and the Bundys are like, we're going to protect you from going to prison for a crime that you admitted to. The Hammonds actually said, we don't want you here. And then the entire town said, we don't want you here. Yet they are still there. Because our tyrannical government is so tyrannical that they're still there. And they're still alive with guns inside of a federal building. And yeah, it's cool that they went in there when nobody was there. They didn't cause any hostage situation. They didn't cause a big scene, which it probably would have become if it had come to that. But it's the fact that they went in there, they barricaded themselves, and they publicly announced that
they were doing it for the Hammonds, but the Hammonds are like, no, leave us alone. Like, this isn't your fight to fight. We understand that we did wrong, and we're going to go and, accept our punishment like civilized human beings that, function within society. And then these people just come out of nowhere using them.
But we held them off with guns, so we're going to do it again. It's just like, okay. And there's really not much even going on in there. Like, they're just kind of sitting there.
Because they're like, we don't want them to lose their ranch. And because the Hammonds still need to pay like half of their fine that they got.
Right.
And so it's like, if they don't pay off the fine, then they're going to have to, they're
going to have to give up the
ranch in order to pay off the fine. And so it's like they screwed up big time.
Pretty much. And they admitted to it.
They admitted to it. And like, they know. It wasn't like the government came in and just started bullying them and pushed them around for no reason. They burned 127 acres of wildlife reserve.
Hold on. We got to go back to the Bundy Ranch, though, because the Bundy Ranch accuses the government of redistributing that water, and then it also accuses them of fencing off a road that turned out to be the county's road, that the Hammond family simply just opened the fence and just drove on through, and the BLM got aggravated and vindictive because as a result of them opening the fence to their own road, and then proceeded to call on them for the Fence Out Act, which was basically if you had a certain amount of land and it was met with federal land, you had to fence it so that your cattle doesn't go onto public land and graze unregulated, because that's the whole point of the regulation of grazing, is because if it goes off and it'll kill wildlife and things like that. There are detrimental effects to grazing if not held properly. If you don't know the proper ways to graze, you're going to cause damage to the environment. That's one of the reasons why grazing is regulated. So what we'll do now is we'll show you why regulate grazing. Brief history of the public lands grazing. During the era of homesteading, western public rangelands were often overgrazed because of policies designed to promote the settlement of the West and a lack of understanding of these arid ecosystems. In response to requests from western ranchers, Congress passed the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934, which led to the creation of grazing districts in which grazing use was apportioned and regulated. Under the Taylor Grazing Act, the first grazing district to be established was Wyoming Grazing District No. 1 on March 23, 1935. Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes created a division of grazing within the department to administer the grazing districts. This division later became the U.S. Grazing Service and was headquartered in Salt Lake City. Now this is in 1946. As a result of a government reorganization by the Truman administration, the Grazing Service was merged with the General Land Office to become the Bureau of Land Management. So the Bureau of Land Management, through obvious evidence of the past, realized, because of the Taylor Grazing Act, that unregulated grazing was bad for the environment. Mm-hmm. So they started to regulate it.
Well, and it's like also, if you don't have enough, like things for your animals to graze off of on your personal your private property, then maybe you have too many animals.
Well, and
maybe
the thing about that though is you can get
so many cattle.
But you can still get permits to go onto federal land and allow your cattle to graze on their land with the permits, and that's something that the ranchers back in Nevada weren't willing to do. They were like, "But no, this was our ancestors' land. We don't care. It's not your land. Federal government can't own land." And it's like, well, yeah, now they can, because over time, history has shown us that it's better to not have private ownership on these lands, because private ownership leads to unregulated messes. Horrible environmental impact that happens every time, like, say, a corporation comes in and starts using up rivers and things like that. It just happens. It's selfish greed. It's almost human at this point. And I have an ad from the 1920s promoting private ownership over federal ownership. So let's just show you guys how these people, what they thought. So, which is best for Oregon, this baby or this bird? This is for the Malheur Bird Reserve. Let me pull up a better, let me see, so I can read it better. All right. So it shows a picture for those listening on IPM Nation, since you can't see the picture. It shows a picture of a bird and a baby. It says, which is best for Oregon, this baby or this bird? And then it says, the Malheur Bird Reserve would take from Oregon 47,000 acres of its most valuable school lands. It would prevent irrigation and reclamation of a fertile and productive country. It would continue a shallow mosquito breeding swamp which harbors mainly worthless, inedible birds such as this.
Hey, so right there is more evidence that it's always been floody.
Yeah, it's swampy, right?
Yeah, they describe it as a swamp. Well, then what do they want it for?
Well, I mean, they just said 47,000 acres of valuable school land, so maybe they wanted to build a shitload of schools to educate all their kids instead of using it for, hunting or things like that.
About swamp? Because they also are like, if we just let it be what it naturally is, it's going to be a breeding ground for mosquitoes because swamp.
Yeah, and then
well, then what the fuck do you want it for?
Well, then it says it would prevent irrigation and reclamation of a fertile and productive country. Reclamation by who? Who's it preventing it from? From private ownership?
Okay, so they want to irrigate the water away so it's not a swampy mess.
Swamp area.
So that then they can reclaim it from what? Nature?
Basically, yes, that's exactly what it is. They literally want to privately own these wildlife lands so that they can build their farms, build their families, pass it on to the later generations, and the government was like,
better idea? Wouldn't a better idea be to just go find some land that doesn't suck so bad?
or land that's, I mean, I don't know, it's ridiculous because they still, in this time period, it's 1920, they still had the idea, when you go west, claim your land, pass it down to your family, it'll always be there. And it's just, it's a wage of the wills, basically. This whole thing is like a war of the wills because these people are not going to give up their private ownership of their land because they're thinking about their future generations. And then on the other hand, you have the federal government thinking about, in this case, managing the land so that it's a proper reserve for the environment, for the habitat, so that these birds can live and prosper and not die off. And that's thinking about future generations also, because if you start private ownership of every freaking piece of wildlife in the country, you're going to end up losing a lot of fucking land.
Yeah, we'll have no trees, we'll have over-farmed land, and we'll have, like, you know, it'll just go to crap, kind of like what caused the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And now we have regulations in place to keep that shit from happening.
Yeah,
again.
Pretty much. Ridiculous. So
because individual humans all on their own are too fucking stupid to look out for their own best interest. They just are thinking about, you know, the immediate.
right, what satisfies them now instead of later.
And they'll do dumb stuff that ends up making things way worse later. Even for them, because a lot of times it happens whenever they're still alive.
Right. And also, let's mention the foster kids thing, since you wanted to talk about that. One of the ranchers out in Oregon right now. Go ahead. You
Yeah,
go.
he has a ranch in Arizona, and he basically was using foster children because he has fostered around 50 teenage boys over the past several years, and he is paid around $30 per day per kid that he has living on his ranch at a time. And in 2010, he made over $100,000 off of fostering these kids. And since he is off in Oregon now,
he's not properly caring for the kids anymore.
He's not properly caring for the kids anymore because he's just left. I mean, his wife is still there, but the agreement is that, you know, both foster parents will be there.
That's how
and
foster
they're supposed
works.
to be, because how many kids they have at a time. Sometimes they have 8 to 10 kids at a time, and it's like, you know, one person can't handle that many kids.
Yeah.
You can't be properly caring for 10 kids with one lady, especially like they're an elderly couple. And so and the foster system came in and they're like, dude, it's not like he's off for it's not like he's in the hospital because he's sick or he's off doing something that he needs to be doing. He's off doing a thing.
But wait, he's being a patriot.
Yeah. Like they said, you know, like basically they're like, we're not, because of his actions, we're not sure if this is even a safe environment for these kids to even be in, because this is a crazy thing to do. And then, so when they look into it, now they're looking into it further, and the statements that he has made since they have came and taken the kids, he has said that they have seized his sole source of income. From the government. Yeah, he referred to these kids, living human beings, as nothing more than a source of income. And he was saying, how am I supposed to run my ranch now? Me and my wife can't run this ranch on our own. And so basically he was using these foster kids as workers to run the ranch. That's worse than slave labor, because it's like
he could use the whole sensei argument and be like, I'm teaching these kids how to be responsible. And all
that's what he did. He said that it was you know, they're troubled teens.
Yeah, exactly.
They're troubled teens, so it's teaching them responsibility or whatever. But he's not paying them for all this work that they're doing or whatever. He's just using troubled teens.
Getting paid for them to work for him.
Yeah, he's getting paid around $30 a day on average to have workers at his place provided to him by the government.
By the government!
And right now, he is up there protesting the government
As a
for taking
tyrant.
things that aren't theirs. And then he's also whining about them taking things that aren't his because these aren't his kids. These are foster children that are not his. He's supposed to be, taking better care of them than their parents were able to do so. But it's like, could that really be a better environment? Whenever he's just like, you took my sole source of income.
Mr. InfoWars.
And he says that he stated that his ranch doesn't sustain itself financially, that the ranch, barely pays for itself. So he doesn't make any income off of the ranch. And then so he's saying this like to get sympathy from people like, oh, I need to make that $100 and something thousand a year off of fostering kids because my ranch is basically a horrible business model.
Well, I mean, ranches are doing pretty bad lately as far as income.
So they want people to feel sorry for him though because he isn't making any money off the ranch. And it's like, well, typically whenever any kind of business starts to go downhill, it's like you downsize, you do things to mitigate costs, but he's using
foster children
as labor and the ranch is still not making any money. Like, what the hell is he doing wrong? And why should we feel sorry for him in this situation? I'm not saying like he's trying to garner sympathy because he literally said that the government came in and seized his sole source of income. And I'm like, well, baby, you should go get a fucking job then.
Well, I mean, I don't know enough about ranching to say what they could do for profits.
He was doing any of the work anyway. He had the kids doing all the work. He was just sitting around and living the high life, basically, while all the kids did all the work. It's like he would go out and show them how to do it, but then they were doing it. And that's why, because the ranch has still been operating while he's been gone.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore, because the government came in and took the kids away to put them in homes that aren't going to use them as slave labor. But it's just like, I just can't believe the gall of him to sit there and be like, the government needs to give me back the things that are mine. The
tyrannical government took my job, and then they took my kids, and they took my freedom and my ranch, and I'm going to just grab a gun and go take a federal government building. It's just like, what the fuck?
It doesn't make any sense.
Like, all right. Yeah, the whole thing just really doesn't make any sense. I mean, I feel like if all these things were happening from the federal government, they should have gathered some evidence and had a good enough case to where they don't have to freaking sit inside of a building, guard their sovereignty from a tyrannical government. So what we're going to do now to end our show is, they asked for snacks, I think, a week after being there. Yeah. They literally posted on Facebook, hey, we need snacks, They gave out a really long list of things, actually. Things that included, like, whipped cream and, like, toothpaste and toothbrush and underwear and all this crap.
I think that they didn't expect to be able to stay there as long as they did, because...
They probably expected a firefight.
Yeah, because whenever they first got there, they're like, we're prepared to stay here for years.
Indefinitely.
They
weren't prepared, though.
Not even weeks later, they're like, oh, God, we need snacks.
We need supplies. We didn't bring enough supplies.
We brought guns. We brought guns, but we forgot food.
Yeah, we forgot, like, the important stuff, So, what we brought you is a video that was made by one of the ranchers in the house. They received some things, and they weren't very happy with the things they received. And before showing you this video to end our show, I want to also add that a comedian that created the Cards Against Humanity, he sent them a 56-gallon barrel of lube. So with that in mind, we're going to show you this. Thank you very much for watching that Atheist show tonight. We'll be back next week. We have an interview next Monday, I think, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes. So look out for that. Next Monday, we'll also be here.
Yeah, keep an eye on our page. We'll have a link set for next Tuesday. And enjoy this video. You have a good night.
What's going on, everybody? So we went and picked up some mail that came in from, a lot of the supporters, but along with that mail, we got an abundance of the hate mail, and it was really mind-blowing to me that people would actually spend their money. This box right here, $17.90. They spend and waste their money on all this hateful stuff to send out here to us, and buy this ridiculous stuff. It's really ridiculous. Even this one was really funny. A bag of dicks.
Bag of dicks.
So rather than going out and doing good, they just spend all their money on hate and hate and hate and hate. So we're gonna create a table, and we're gonna continue to do work and do good for our country. We're not gonna be deterred. We're not gonna let all your junk and hate mail sidetrack us, and we're going to continue to do what's right for our country. For the rest of you patriots out there that are still twiddling your thumbs, debating whether or not you should come out, well, now's the time. If you want to be part of history in the making, you need to get out here and you need to show some support. And I'm not talking about coming out here and being an outside perimeter. Come here and be a patriot. Come here and stand up for your country. Do what's right. Enough talk. Now it's time for action. I hope to see you.